My name is Michael. I am 74 years old, and even at this age, I find myself shaken by the kind of betrayal I never expected to face from my own family. For most of my life, I worked hard as a postal inspector. I lived honestly, saved my money, and built a quiet, steady life. When I finally retired, I thought I had earned peace. I thought the years ahead would be calm, with me enjoying the house I shared with my late wife Martha. My home overlooks Rehoboth Bay, a place of calm waters, wide skies, and gentle breezes. Martha and I lived here together for 40 years. Every corner of this house carries her memory, her touch in the yellow-painted walls of our bedroom, her favorite flowers still growing in the garden, her photos resting carefully on the dresser. After she passed, I promised myself I would preserve our home the way we loved it. I stayed independent, cooked my own meals, tended the yard, and followed the routines we had built together. This house was my sanctuary. But all of that changed one Tuesday morning. My son, Stephen, showed up at my front door with his wife Patricia and their 2 children. They weren't alone. They had 6 large suitcases with them. Stephen smiled, but it was the kind of forced smile that told me something wasn't right. "Dad," he said, "we need to stay with you for a while. Our house is under renovation. It might be a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months. Don't worry, we won't be any trouble." Before I could respond, Patricia was already stepping inside, walking through my living room as though she owned it. I heard Stephen tell her to head toward the master bedroom, my bedroom, the room where Martha and I had built our life together. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and tried to hide the unease rising in my chest. That evening, things became even clearer. I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. They were talking about turning my home office into a permanent bedroom for Patricia's parents. My office, the place where I kept my records, my books, and the quiet that I had always needed. I sat frozen, realizing this was not just a short stay. They were planning to take over my home. The next morning, Patricia began to show her true self. She walked through the house like a general inspecting a battlefield, making lists on her phone, moving furniture around without asking. She started in the kitchen. I stood there helpless as she pulled everything out of my refrigerator, tossing it into garbage bags. "This cheese expired 3 days ago," she announced, holding up a block of cheddar I had bought only 2 days earlier. Then she lifted a package of deli meat and shook her head. "Do you know how much sodium is in this? You could poison yourself eating this." It didn't stop there. She called my groceries unhealthy. She said my old records were dusty and outdated, so she moved them into the garage. She even redecorated my living room with her own paintings and art, pushing aside all the framed photographs of Martha and our family. "Obadiah," she said one afternoon, calling me by my full name as though I were a child being scolded. "You'll be much safer on the first floor. These stairs are dangerous for you at your age. Why don't you let us have the upstairs suite?" Her words stung. This was my home. These were my stairs. This was the bedroom where Martha and I had lived, dreamed, and shared our lives. Now it was gone, claimed by them as though my memories didn't matter. Within 24 hours, the house no longer felt like mine. Patricia moved with authority, and Stephen followed her lead silently. My sanctuary was slipping away from me, piece by piece, as though my very life was being erased to make room for theirs. I stood quietly in the kitchen, watching Patricia toss out my groceries one after another. She didn't ask. She didn't pause. She just pulled items from the refrigerator, checking the dates like a schoolteacher grading a careless student. Into the trash went the bread I'd bought 3 days ago. Out went the eggs that had been perfectly fine that morning. I wanted to say something, to tell her that I'd been feeding myself just fine for the 5 years since Martha passed away. I wanted to remind her that I'd made it to 74 without her help, eating the food I chose, living the way I preferred. But the words stayed locked behind my teeth. Stephen's voice carried through the house. He paced from room to room, talking on his phone. His tone was brisk, businesslike. "Yes, the office upstairs will work. We'll need a contractor in here to measure. What's the timeline? How soon can you start? He wasn't talking to me. He wasn't asking my permission. He was making plans for my house without even glancing in my direction. When he returned to the kitchen, Patricia was still deep in her purge. He slipped his phone into his pocket and spoke casually, as though the decision had already been made. "Dad," he said, "Patricia and I will take the master bedroom. You'll be more comfortable downstairs. No stairs to climb, and the guest bathroom is right there." It makes sense. The words hit me like a blow. My chest tightened. The master bedroom wasn't just a room. It had been Martha's and mine for 4 decades. Her scent still lingered in the closet from the lavender sachets she tucked in with her sweaters. Her books rested on the nightstand where she'd left them. Our photographs stood in their familiar places on the dresser. That bedroom wasn't just space. It was memory. It was the heart of my life with her. It was the place where she had fought her last fight, and where I had held her hand until her breath stopped. I steadied my voice. "I'm quite comfortable upstairs. I climb those stairs every day. It's good exercise for me." Patricia didn't even look up from the refrigerator. Her tone was sweet, but sharp, the kind of voice people use when talking to a stubborn child. "Michael, you're 74. Stairs are dangerous at your age, especially at night. What if you trip on your way to the bathroom? You could break a hip." "I have a bathroom upstairs," I countered, "and I've never fallen on those stairs in my life." Patricia closed the refrigerator door and turned toward me. Her eyes were cool, her lips pressed into a thin line. "There's a first time for everything." Then, as if I weren't even standing there, she said, "Stephen, tell your father we're only concerned about his safety." Stephen gave me a look I'd grown familiar with over the years. Pity mixed with impatience. The kind of look that said he saw me as fragile, as someone slipping into irrelevance. It stung more than I could say. I had raised him. I had worked 40 years, saving and sacrificing so he could go to college, so he could have the life he wanted. And now, when I looked into his eyes, I felt less like his father and more like a burden. "Dad, please," Stephen said gently, though his tone carried finality. "It's only for a few weeks. The guest room is comfortable. You'll have everything you need downstairs." Comfortable. That was the word he used. But the guest room was small and cramped, furnished with an old single bed and a dresser that hadn't been touched in decades. It wasn't comfort. It was compromise. It was exile within my own home. Still, I could see there was no use arguing. Their decision was already made. My opinion didn't matter. So I nodded, though the movement felt heavy. I went upstairs and began the slow, painful process of moving my belongings. Each item I touched carried a memory. Martha's jewelry box, the framed photos from our honeymoon, the books we'd read aloud to each other on quiet nights. Every object that once made the master bedroom feel alive now felt like a farewell as I carried it to the smaller space downstairs. Each trip down the stairs was another surrender, another piece of myself slipping away. By evening, the room I had loved for 40 years no longer looked like mine at all. Patricia had already filled it with her things. Bright modern artwork hung on the walls. Her makeup and perfumes spread across Martha's vanity. My wife's photographs were moved aside to make room for her designer purses and jewelry. The scent of lavender that once comforted me was drowned by Patricia's strong perfumes. The living room, too, had changed. Stephen's laptop bag and stacks of business papers covered the coffee table where Martha and I once shared our quiet morning coffee. Brandon and Ashley had taken over my office upstairs, filling it with their video games, speakers, and piles of clothes. The sound of thumping bass shook the floorboards beneath my feet. Where silence once offered me peace, now there was nothing but noise, chaos, and the feeling of being pushed further and further into the background of my own life. My home no longer felt like mine. It felt like I was only a guest. That first night at dinner, sitting at my own dining table, I felt like an outsider. My chair was the same. The food was familiar, but everything else had shifted. The voices around me were louder, sharper, and I found myself pushing food around my plate as though I were the guest of someone else, someone who no longer remembered inviting me. But the true shock didn't come that night. It came 2 weeks later, on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I was in the cramped downstairs room they now called my bedroom, though it felt more like a storage closet with a narrow bed shoved against the wall. I sat hunched there, reading one of Martha's favorite novels, the same one she had once read aloud to me on quiet summer evenings. A pair of headphones played softly in my ears. Music Brandon had helped me load onto my phone. It was one of the few small kindnesses in those 2 weeks. Then came a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. "Grandpa, may I come in?" Ashley's voice. My granddaughter, 19 years old. Until now, she had barely spoken to me since arriving, always rushing past with her phone pressed to her ear, disappearing upstairs to her world of friends and screens. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice warming with surprise. The door opened, and she stepped inside. She froze in the doorway, her eyes sweeping the room. For the first time, she saw what my life had become: boxes stacked against the walls, photo albums piled on the small dresser, my books spilling across every surface because there was no space for them here. Her face softened. "Wow," she whispered. "I didn't realize you had to bring everything down here." "Not everything," I replied quietly. "Your mother decided most of my things were outdated or took up too much space." Ashley crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed. She tugged nervously at the hem of her oversized college sweatshirt. I noticed the worry in her eyes, the way her shoulders curved inward as though carrying a secret too heavy for her age. "Grandpa," she began, "I came to warn you about something." The words made me set the book aside. I turned fully toward her, giving her my undivided attention. "What is it, Ashley?" She hesitated, then said, "I overheard Mom and Dad talking last night. They thought I was asleep." A chill ran through me. "What about?" I asked carefully. She took a breath. "It's about Mom's parents, Grandma Linda and Grandpa Richard. They're moving here. They've already put their house in Ocean City up for sale, and there's a buyer lined up." Her words landed like a punch to the gut. I had suspected something, of course. Their whispers, their phone calls, the way Patricia had been measuring and listing everything in the house. But to hear it confirmed by Ashley was something else entirely. My throat tightened. "This house isn't big enough for 7 adults," I said slowly. "Where do they plan to put them?" Ashley's face crumpled. Her voice dropped. "That's why I came to warn you, Grandpa. Mom and Dad think you'd be better off somewhere else." I stared at her, not quite believing. "Somewhere else?" "They've been looking at places," she admitted. "Assisted living facilities." My blood ran cold. "What kind of facilities?" "There's one called Sunset Manor, in Lewis," she said reluctantly. "They went to tour it yesterday, while you were at your doctor's appointment." I felt my jaw tighten. Sunset Manor. I knew it all too well. The cheapest nursing home in the county. The local paper had written about it. Understaffed, overcrowded, a place that smelled of bleach and hopelessness. Residents left sitting in wheelchairs for hours. Meals cold and tasteless. Martha and I had once whispered our fears of ending up there, promising each other we'd never let it come to that. "And what did they say about this place?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, strained, hollow. "They said you'd be better cared for there," Ashley said softly. "That the professionals could keep you safe." My hands curled into fists on my knees. Safe. That word again. Patricia's favorite. Safe from stairs. Safe from groceries. Safe from living. "When?" I asked, my voice low. "Are they planning to tell me about this decision they've made for me?" Ashley looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "Tonight. After dinner. They want to have a family meeting." A family meeting. As though I were still part of this family. As though I were not simply an inconvenience to be managed, shuffled aside, packed away like old furniture. "Did they say how long they expect me to stay there?" I asked. Ashley was quiet for a long time. Too long. When she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. Ashley's voice broke as she finally said it. "Mom said it would be permanent. She thinks you can't live alone anymore. And they're too busy with work and college expenses to take care of you properly." Take care of me. The words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. I had been taking care of myself just fine for 5 years since Martha's death. I managed my own finances. I cooked every meal with my own hands. I drove myself wherever I needed to go. I kept every doctor's appointment, every responsibility. The only thing I had failed to do, the only thing I couldn't seem to control, was stopping my own family from treating me as if I were an invalid. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. Grandpa, I tried to talk to them. I told them you seemed fine to me, that maybe they could hire someone to check in on you once in a while. But Mom said the decision was already made. Her voice cracked. They already put down a deposit. I froze. A deposit. They had already committed my future without consulting me. Just as easily as Patricia had claimed my bedroom, my kitchen, my living room, they had claimed the rest of my life too. My anger burned hot, but underneath it, a kind of clarity began to rise. I reached for Ashley's hand. Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. You couldn't have changed their minds, no matter how hard you tried. But it's not fair, she whispered, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. This is your house. You built your whole life here with Grandma Martha. They shouldn't just ship you away because it's inconvenient to have you around. Her words cut deeper than anything Stephen or Patricia had said. Because my 19-year-old granddaughter could see the truth plainly, while her parents were blind to it, or chose to be. This wasn't about my health. It wasn't about my safety. This was about convenience, about control, about my house, my property, and the life they wanted to carve out of it. Ashley looked at me, her expression raw with love and fear. What are you going to do, Grandpa? I studied her face, so young and yet so honest. And in that moment, I made a promise, not just to her, but to Martha, to myself. I don't know yet, I said slowly, but I'm not going down without a fight. That evening, just as Ashley had warned, the family meeting was called. Stephen gathered everyone into the living room after dinner. Chairs were arranged in a neat semicircle, as though I were on trial, and they were preparing to pass judgment. I sat in my old recliner, the last piece of furniture Patricia hadn't managed to shove aside, and waited for them to deliver their verdict. Dad, Stephen began, his voice artificially cheerful. We want to talk about your future, about what's best for everyone. I looked him dead in the eye. My future? Or the future of this house? Patricia leaned forward, her tone sharp but polished, like someone rehearsing a speech. Michael, we can all see that living alone is becoming difficult for you. You forget to take your medications. You don't eat properly. And this house is simply too large for one man to maintain safely. Really, I shot back, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're worried about where to put your parents. Stephen flushed. He glanced at Ashley, who was staring at her lap, her hands folded tightly together. Dad, he said stiffly, let's be honest. Yes, Patricia's parents need a place to stay after selling their house. But that's separate from our concern for your health and safety. I leaned forward in my recliner. So what you've found, then, is a solution that just happens to solve both your problems. Patricia's lips curled into a practiced smile as she reached into her bag. We found you a wonderful community, she announced, pulling out a glossy brochure. She laid it across the coffee table like she was presenting a prize. Sunset Manor isn't just a nursing home, she continued in her saleswoman's voice. It's a retirement community for active seniors. There's a library, organized activities, professional staff to help with medications and meals, everything you could possibly need. Her words hung in the air like poison wrapped in sugar. I knew she was lying about Sunset Manor. I'd heard the stories, understaffed, institutional, more like a warehouse than a home. But I also knew arguing about it wouldn't change their minds. They had already decided. I'm not going anywhere, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is my home, and I'm staying here. Dad, be reasonable, Stephen replied, leaning forward. You can't live here alone, and we can't take care of you while managing our jobs and the kids. Brandon's senior year is starting, and Ashley's college tuition. We have responsibilities. You didn't have to take care of me. I said. I managed on my own for 5 years after Martha died. You moved in here and started running my life. Now you want to ship me off so Patricia's parents can move in. Patricia's voice rose. Michael, how can you say that? We're only thinking of your welfare. You could fall down the stairs, suffer a medical emergency with no one around, or forget to turn off the stove and burn the house down. Then leave, I said simply. Go back to your lives and let me live mine. That's impossible, Stephen snapped. We've already made arrangements. You're moving to Sunset Manor next Friday. Everything's been decided. He exchanged a look with Patricia I didn't like. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. At your age, if family members raise concerns about your ability to live independently, the state takes it seriously. The threat was clear. They were ready to have me declared incompetent if I didn't agree. I looked around the room at my family, searching for anything that felt like love or real concern. I found only determination to remove an obstacle from their path. Fine, I said quietly. I'll go to your nursing home. But don't expect me to forgive you for this. Their faces softened with relief. That told me everything I needed to know about what this had always been about. The next 5 days blurred together. Packing felt like surrender. Patricia supervised like a customs officer, deciding what could go and what would be left behind. My books, years of postal service memorabilia, and countless photo boxes were judged unnecessary and sent to the garage. Each object I handed over felt like a small defeat. On Friday morning, I sat in the passenger seat of Stephen's SUV and watched my house disappear in the rearview mirror. The road between my life with Martha and the place they had chosen for me felt longer than 30 minutes. I thought about the rooms where we had laughed and argued and planned. I thought about her voice and the way the house used to smell like coffee and sun. I thought about how, in one short week, everything I had built felt rearranged around someone else's plan. Sunset Manor looked exactly as I had feared, a 3-story brick building with manicured but lifeless shrubbery. Through the windows, I saw people sitting motionless in chairs, faces turned toward televisions or windows. The front door opened to the smell I had dreaded most, disinfectant mixed with cafeteria food and the weary odor of people waiting. Inside, the lobby felt neat and efficient. The staff moved with polite distance. Paperwork was passed back and forth, signatures collected like permission slips for a life I didn't want to start. They showed me the room, small, functional, with a single bed pushed against a wall, a narrow dresser, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. It was clean, I suppose, and safe, if safety meant looking the same as everything else. They explained the schedule, meals at set times, activities to join if I wished, a nurse on duty. They used phrases like community, support, and professionally managed. The words sounded comforting when printed on a brochure. Spoken to my face, they felt hollow. That first night, I lay on a bed that wasn't mine and listened to the building breathe around me. There was a sound to institutional living. The distant hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of slippers in the hall, the clink of plates. It all felt like a different kind of silence, a silence that meant people were close but not connected. I thought of Martha. I thought of our bedroom with its lavender sachets and the photographs on the dresser. I thought of all the small things I had packed into boxes and left behind. The house on the bay had been our promise to each other, a place to grow old, to keep loving and remembering. Now, far from those rooms, I felt the sharpness of loss in a new way. They told me this was for my good. They called it concern. But what they had given me in return for my life was a timetable, a room with a neat bed, and the certainty that my days would now be arranged by others. The relief on their faces was a small, quiet verdict. I closed my eyes and promised myself something then. I would not let them erase everything without holding on to what mattered most. I didn't yet know how I would fight, but I knew I wouldn't accept being written out of my own life quietly. The intake process dragged on for nearly 2 hours. Pages of forms, medical histories to transfer, signatures to sign, rules to acknowledge. They explained meal times, activity schedules, medication checks. Everything was laid out in neat columns, as though life itself could be boxed into a timetable. When it was over, they showed me to my new home, a space no larger than 10 by 12 feet, containing a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. This was where I was expected to live out my days. Stephen and Patricia helped unpack my 2 suitcases, the sum total of what I'd been allowed to bring from the house Martha and I had built together. It took 15 minutes at most. "We'll visit soon, Dad," Stephen said as they prepared to leave. His tone was warm enough, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Once we get settled with Patricia's parents and finish the renovations." I didn't bother replying. I knew what soon meant. Infrequent visits, brief appearances, guilt wrapped in excuses. After they left, silence filled the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bare walls. At 74, discarded by my own family, I felt more warehoused than housed, as if I were being stored here until I wore out completely. My window looked out onto a cracked asphalt parking lot. The sounds outside my door were the shuffle of nurses' feet, the squeak of wheelchairs, and the low, confused murmurs of the elderly residents. It was in that bleak moment that I heard a voice. A familiar voice. "Michael?" "Michael Miller." I looked up quickly. In the doorway stood a tall, thin man with gray hair and a look of surprise on his face. It took me a moment, but then recognition dawned. "Walter?" "Walter Hoffman." He grinned. "Well, I'll be. I thought it was you. What on earth are you doing here?" Walter and I had worked side by side in the Postal Service for 15 years before he transferred to the Delaware office. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. I stood and shook his hand firmly. "I could ask you the same thing." Walter stepped into the room and lowered himself into the chair by the bed. "I've been here 8 months, he said. "Had a stroke last year. My daughter decided she couldn't handle my care anymore. Said it was too much responsibility." His voice carried a bitter edge I recognized immediately. We talked through lunch and well into the afternoon. He told me about the slow dismantling of his life, his daughter selling his house, disposing of his belongings, telling him it was all for his own good. He spoke without self-pity, but the weight in his words was heavy. Yet there was something different about Walter compared to the other residents I had seen shuffling down the halls. His mind was still sharp. His wit was intact. Even with the lingering weakness from his stroke, he was far from ready to give up on living. "But you," he said suddenly, fixing me with a steady gaze. "You don't belong here. You're walking fine. Your memory's good. You don't need help with anything. What's your story?" So I told him. Everything. The sudden arrival of Stephen and his family. The way Patricia had taken over my house, step by step erasing the life Martha and I had built. The so-called family meeting, the ultimatum, the threat of legal guardianship if I refused Sunset Manor. Walter didn't interrupt. His expression grew more incredulous with every detail. "And the house," he asked finally, "it's still in your name?" "Yes," I admitted. Stephen was supposed to transfer it 2 years ago, but he kept postponing it. Something about tax implications, waiting until after I trailed off, unable to finish. "Until after you died," Walter said bluntly, as he always had with uncomfortable truths. I exhaled slowly. "Yes." "Then legally," Walter said, leaning back with that calculating look I remembered from our old service days, "you still own the property they're living in." "Technically, yes. But what good does that do me now?" Walter's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly working. "Michael, my friend, you may have more power in this situation than you realize." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, voice low. "I mean that if you own that house outright, you can do whatever you want with it, including selling it." The idea struck me like a lightning bolt. Sell the house. At first the thought seemed almost sacrilegious. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was 40 years of Martha and me. The life we had built, the memories soaked into every wall, every creak of the floorboards, every flower in the garden. To sell it felt like betraying her. But Walter's words cut through my sentiment. "And now your son and his wife have taken it from you anyway. They're living there. using your belongings, sleeping in your bedroom, while you're stuck in this place. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something spark inside me. Not despair, not resignation, something closer to hope, or maybe vengeance. Walter leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the same mischief I remembered from our working days. What if you could get your house back and teach them a lesson at the same time? The next morning, Walter introduced me to his nephew, Marcus, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s with quick eyes and the calm confidence of someone who knew his worth. He came to Sunset Manor under the pretense of visiting his uncle, but in truth, he was there for me. We met in the small garden behind the building, a place the other residents rarely bothered with. The air smelled faintly of mulch and damp earth, and for once, the scent wasn't antiseptic. Uncle Walter explained your situation, Marcus said, settling onto the weathered bench beside me. His voice was low, deliberate, and I think I can help you. My skepticism must have shown because he smiled. Property values in Rio Beach have gone through the roof these past 2 years. A waterfront house like yours, even with complications, will attract serious buyers. I narrowed my eyes. Complications? Your son and his family, Marcus said simply. Most buyers don't want to deal with tenants, especially ones who think they own the place. But I have a client who's different. He might be perfect. He pulled out his phone and swiped through photos of an expansive home, modern, light-filled, with wide porches overlooking the water. Jonathan Baker, Marcus said. 55. Just sold his chain of restaurants in Virginia. He's looking for a retirement property on the Delaware coast. More importantly, Marcus paused, letting the suspense build. He's interested in properties where he can build a guest house or in-law suite. My heart thumped. A guest house. Exactly. Your lot is big enough. If we can close this deal, Baker would let you live right there in a private guest house. You'd have your independence, your water views, and you'd be free from your son's thumb. The idea was almost too much to take in. Could I really step back into my life, on my own terms, while Stephen and Patricia watched their scheme crumble? But reality tugged at me. How do we manage showings? I can't exactly knock on the door of my own house with a stranger in tow. Marcus's grin was sly, practiced. Leave that to me. Sunset Manor runs day trips all the time. Museums, gardens, shopping centers. No one questions family or friends taking residence on little outings. Officially, you'll be touring the Rehoboth Beach Botanical Gardens. In reality, you'll be showing your house. I couldn't help but chuckle, the first genuine laugh I'd felt in months. Over the next week, Marcus worked quietly, efficiently. He prepared the paperwork, gathered comps, and arranged everything with Baker. The man was relentless in his precision, the same way Walter had been back in our postal days when he was untangling a snarl of delivery routes. Finally, the day came. A staff member at Sunset Manor helped a small group of us onto a van bound for the gardens. At the next corner, Marcus was waiting in a sleek black sedan. He whisked me away, and within minutes we were pulling up to a quiet coffee shop, where Jonathan Baker sat waiting with a firm handshake and curious eyes. Jonathan wasn't what I'd expected from a man who had built and sold a restaurant empire. I had pictured a flashy businessman, gold watch, loud voice, quick smile with too many teeth. Instead, he arrived in khakis and a plain blue button-down, his silver hair neatly combed back. His face was lined not from stress but from laughter, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm without being overpowering. "Mr. Miller," he said, his tone steady and respectful. "I've heard a little about your situation, and I want you to know I respect what you're doing. It takes courage to take control of your life at any age, especially when family tries to take the choice away from you." That simple acknowledgement nearly undid me. For weeks, I had been treated as though my opinions no longer mattered. To hear someone recognize my dignity felt like a door opening. We sat in the coffee shop for nearly an hour before even mentioning the house. Jonathan told me his story, how he'd inherited a small roadside diner from his father, how he'd worked night and day until it grew into a chain of restaurants across Virginia, and how, after decades of success, he sold it all so he could finally rest. Then his voice softened. "My wife, Mary Ann, passed from cancer 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Since then, I've been looking for a place where I could start fresh. Not alone, never alone, but somewhere I could feel connected again. Somewhere with roots." He glanced out the window toward the ocean breeze rattling the awnings. "I've toured houses for 8 months. They're all beautiful, but they feel hollow, like they're waiting for life to happen. What Marcus told me about your house, about its history, the years you and your wife spent there. That's what I'm looking for. A place with soul." When we finally drove to the property, Marcus had already scouted ahead. Stephen was tied up at work. Patricia had taken her parents shopping in Dover. The coast was clear. Crossing my own threshold again was surreal. Everything was familiar, yet wrong. Patricia's touches were everywhere. Sterile curtains replacing Martha's warm lace. Generic art where our photographs once hung. My reading chair gone in favor of a sleek sectional that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not a home. I felt like a ghost wandering through a life that no longer belonged to me. Jonathan didn't rush. He walked each room slowly, listening as I told him the stories that lived within those walls. The Christmas mornings by the fireplace, the summer storms we'd watched roll across the bay, the birthdays, the anniversaries. But he wasn't analyzing the house like a speculator. He wasn't calculating resale values or renovation costs. He was imagining life within it. "This kitchen has good light," he said, pausing by the window. "I can see myself here in the mornings, making coffee, watching the water wake up." When we stepped onto the back deck, he studied the yard with a careful, practiced eye. Then he pointed toward a level patch of ground near the corner of the lot. The guest house could go there. Close enough for convenience, but far enough for privacy. We'd give it its own entrance. A small porch facing the water, perhaps. I swallowed hard. "You'd really be comfortable with me, living on your property?" Jonathan turned toward me, his gaze steady. "When I was a boy, my grandfather lived in a little apartment above our restaurant. He taught me how to cook, how to run a business, how to treat people. He wasn't a burden. He was a blessing. I wouldn't be the man I am without him. When he died, I didn't just lose him. I lost the wisdom of someone who had walked further down the road than I had." He swept his hand toward the bay, the house, the sky above us. "This place is more than lumber and shingles. It's the story of you and your wife. I'd be honored to be its next caretaker. And I'd be even more honored if you stayed, to keep its history alive." By the time Marcus dropped me back at Sunset Manor, the impossible had happened. Jonathan Baker had made a formal offer, 20% above market value, cash. And more importantly, the contract would include a binding clause. He would build me a guest house to my specifications, and I would have the right to live there for as long as I wished. For the first time in months, I felt like I had power again. The paperwork had been signed, sealed, and recorded. My house was no longer mine, but it also no longer belonged to Stephen and Patricia, no matter what they thought. Jonathan Baker was now the legal owner, and soon, the truth would crash down on them like a wave at high tide. For 10 long nights, I lay awake in the narrow bed at Sunset Manor, rehearsing the moment in my head. Patricia's smug smile dissolving into disbelief. Stephen's voice cracking as he realized the inheritance he'd been counting on was gone. Richard and Linda, halfway through their birthday cake, realizing they were celebrating in a house that wasn't theirs to occupy. The thought filled me not just with relief, but with an excitement I hadn't felt in years. Saturday arrived cloaked in gray drizzle, the kind of weather Delaware wears like an old coat. Appropriate, I thought, for what was about to happen. Jonathan pulled up in a navy blazer and khakis, looking effortlessly composed. "Nervous?" he asked as I climbed into his car. "Terrified," I admitted, fastening my seat belt with shaking hands. "But also more excited than I've been in years." He smiled, calm as always. "Then it's the right kind of fear." When we reached my old street, Marcus was already waiting at the corner. His car was parked discreetly beneath a tree, and he stepped out holding a slim leather folder, the deed transfer, the smoking gun. From where we stood, I could see cars packed into the driveway and lining both curbs. Balloons in gold and white bobbed from the mailbox. Laughter and music floated faintly from the backyard. "Looks like half the neighborhood's there," Marcus said, glancing at me with the same calculating eyes I remembered from his Uncle Walter. "All the better. More witnesses." I swallowed hard. The house looked both familiar and foreign. My house, but not my home. Its porch, once decorated with Martha's hanging flower baskets, now sported Patricia's sterile lanterns. Through the front window, I could see people milling about, glasses in hand, as if this place had always belonged to them. My chest tightened, but Jonathan put a hand on my shoulder. "This is your moment, Michael. Let's take it back." Together, we walked up the driveway. Inside, the party was in full swing. Balloons tied to chairs, folding tables covered with paper cloths. Patricia darting between guests with a wine glass in hand, her laughter loud and artificial. Stephen stood near the kitchen, chatting with Richard, who beamed like a king on his throne, basking in his 75th birthday. The music softened as people noticed us standing in the doorway. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. A hush spread through the room. Patricia's smile froze when she saw me, the last person she expected to walk through that door. "Dad," Stephen said finally, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you doing here?" I thought you'd like to meet someone," I interrupted, my voice steady. I gestured to Jonathan beside me. "This is Jonathan Baker. He's the new owner of this house." For a moment, silence hung so thick I could hear the rain pattering on the deck outside. Then Patricia's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. Richard looked around, his brow furrowing when he saw the frozen tableau in the living room. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being answered. Patricia spun toward him, her composure cracking. "Nothing, Richard. Just a misunderstanding." Jonathan stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "Not a misunderstanding, ma'am. My name is Jonathan Baker. As of this week, I am the legal owner of this property. Mr. Miller here was kind enough to sell it to me directly." The room seemed to tilt. Conversations from the dining room died out as more guests leaned in to listen. Even the musicians on the deck had stopped tuning, their curious faces visible through the sliding glass doors. Richard blinked. "Owner? What the devil are you talking about?" I pulled in a steady breath, the years of quiet humiliation I'd suffered suddenly burning away. "He means this isn't your daughter's house, Richard. It's mine. It always was. And last week, I sold it to Mr. Baker. Legally. Completely. Irrevocably." Patricia let out a strangled laugh, sharp and brittle. "This is insane. You can't just..." He can't. Marcus, who had slipped inside quietly behind us, produced the leather folder and opened it with deliberate care. "Actually, he can. And he did. Here are the recorded deed transfers from Sussex County. Stamped, signed, and binding." He laid the documents on the coffee table where everyone could see. Guests craned their necks. Stephen stared at the papers as if they might vanish if he blinked hard enough. Patricia looked ready to tear them in half with her bare hands. Jonathan, calm as ever, added, "I understand this is an inconvenient moment, but I thought it best to be forthright. Legally, you have 30 days to vacate. I expect that will be enough time to make other arrangements." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman near the back whispered, 30 days? A man murmured, "They didn't even own it." Richard turned slowly toward Patricia, his face darkening. "Is this true?" For once, Patricia had no quick answer. Her lips trembled, her perfectly rehearsed social mask shattering under the weight of a truth she couldn't spin. I stood there, heart pounding, but stronger than I'd felt in years. For the first time, it was Stephen and Patricia squirming in the spotlight, not me. Richard was a tall, distinguished man who carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from years of experience and authority. He moved with a straight, military-like posture, his every gesture precise. Linda, his wife, was perfectly dressed, hair and makeup immaculate, and clearly used to being the center of attention at social events. "What's going on here?" Richard demanded, scanning the room. His voice was calm but carried weight, the kind that made people stop and pay attention. Patricia opened her mouth, her teeth clenched in frustration. "This is Michael," she said, her voice tight, almost shaking. "And apparently, he sold the house out from under us." Linda gasped and placed a hand on her chest. "Sold the house? How could he sell the house when you live here?" "Because it was legally his to sell," Jonathan answered before I could speak. He stepped forward calmly, his presence steady. "And I am the buyer. I'll be taking possession in 30 days, as the purchase agreement clearly states." Stephen, pale and flustered, finally found his voice. "This is impossible. Dad, you're living in a care facility. You can't make major decisions about property without consulting your family." I looked directly at him. "I'm living in Sunset Manor because you and Patricia forced me there. I was declared fully competent by an independent physician before signing any of the papers. The sale is completely legal." A few more guests had drifted into the living room, curious about the loud voices. I recognized some of Patricia's relatives and a few neighbors, all dressed for the party. Their expressions quickly changed from festive smiles to astonishment as they realized what was happening. A family argument unfolding like a public drama right before their eyes. Patricia tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice, "why don't you step out onto the deck? The musicians are ready, and the caterers are bringing appetizers." But no one moved. Everyone's attention was on the tense scene in the living room. The confrontation had become far more interesting than any party entertainment. Linda's voice rose, taking on a shrill quality. "You can't just throw us out. We sold our house to move here. We have nowhere else to go." Jonathan remained calm. "You have 30 days to find alternative accommodations. That is more notice than most landlords provide, and certainly more than the notice I was given when you decided to ship Mr. Miller to a nursing home against his will." Stephen stammered, trying to justify their actions. "We didn't force him anywhere. He needed professional care. He couldn't manage such a big house on his own anymore." I shook my head slowly, looking around the room at all the guests. "Really?" I asked quietly, my voice carrying through the tense air. "Then why did you move your entire family into my home instead of hiring the professional help you claim I needed?" Patricia stepped closer, her eyes blazing with anger. "Michael, you don't understand what you've done. This isn't just about us. Stephen has a job here. The children have school. We have responsibilities. Commitments." I met her gaze steadily. "And I had a life," I replied softly. "A life you dismantled piece by piece until I felt like a stranger in my own home. You threw away my belongings, took over my bedroom, treated me like an inconvenience to be managed rather than the man who raised your husband and owned the house you were living in." The room fell completely silent. Even the faint music from the deck seemed to pause. The caterers stopped moving, listening from the kitchen doorway. All eyes were on the confrontation, waiting for what would happen next. Richard's voice finally broke the silence. He sounded stern, accustomed to having his statements accepted without question. "The sale cannot be legal," he said, his tone firm. But for the first time, there was uncertainty creeping in around the edges of his authority. "Stephen, call our lawyer immediately." Patricia snapped, her face flushed with anger. This man took advantage of an elderly person in a vulnerable state. I stood my ground, my voice steady. "I'm standing right here," I said firmly. "I am neither vulnerable nor incompetent. I am a 74-year-old man who has been treated like a burden by the people who were supposed to love and respect me. That ends now." Jonathan cleared his throat and spoke calmly. "Perhaps we should discuss the practical details. You have until October 15th to relocate. After that, I'll be hiring contractors to build a guest house on the property where Michael will be living. Construction will begin shortly after you vacate." Patricia's face went pale, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "You're building him a house on this property?" "A guest house." "Yes," Jonathan confirmed. "Michael will have his independence while remaining near the water he loves." Stephen's voice trembled with bitterness. "What are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the grateful child I had raised, but the entitled man he had become. "Stephen," I said, "you are supposed to do what millions of adults do every day. Find housing you can afford with your own resources. Rent an apartment, buy a smaller house, figure it out, like everyone else." "This is insane," Stephen shouted. Patricia turned to the guests, trying to save face. "I'm sorry, everyone," she said, her voice shaking. "We're having a family crisis. Perhaps we should postpone the celebration." "Oh no," I said, surprising both myself and the onlookers. "Don't cancel the party on my account. Mr. Baker and I just wanted to deliver the news personally and answer any questions about the transition. You all should enjoy Richard's birthday." As we walked toward the door, I heard Patricia hissing at Stephen, talking about lawyers, lawsuits, and how this shouldn't be possible. But Jonathan had prepared every detail carefully, and Marcus had assured me the sale was solid and completely legal. Standing on the porch where this ordeal had begun weeks ago, I took one last look at the house, the home Martha and I had shared, where I had raised my children, where I had expected to spend my final years in peace. "Any regrets?" Jonathan asked quietly as we walked to his car. I thought about it. Did I regret shocking them in front of their guests? Did I regret taking back control of my life so dramatically? Not for a moment. "None whatsoever," I said. "For the first time in months, I feel like myself again." Within hours of leaving the party, the phone calls began. The staff at Sunset Manor told me Stephen had called 3 times before dinner, demanding to speak with me, threatening legal action, insisting I reverse the sale immediately. When I finally answered his call that evening, his voice was a mixture of anger and desperation I had never heard before. "Dad," he shouted, "you've made a terrible mistake. We've consulted with an attorney. There are grounds to challenge this sale. You were living in a care facility when you signed those papers. Any judge would question your mental capacity." I smiled quietly, the weight of months of fear and humiliation lifting from my shoulders. "Stephen," I said calmly, "I may have been living there, but I was in full control of my mind and my decisions. The sale is legal, and I wouldn't change a thing." The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. For once, I had turned the tables. For once, my life, my dignity, and my independence were mine again. "Stephen," I said calmly, "I was evaluated by an independent physician before signing anything. Dr. Harrison confirmed that I'm mentally competent and fully capable of making my own decisions. Your lawyer will see that the sale is completely legal and binding." His voice shook with frustration. "But where are we supposed to go?" Patricia's parents sold their house. The kids have school. I have my job at the accounting firm. Our whole life is built around being here. I met his gaze evenly. "Then you should have thought of that before you decided to throw me away like garbage." The firmness in my voice surprised even me. "You made your choice when you prioritized your convenience over my dignity. Now you live with the consequences of your actions." Over the next week, they tried every strategy they could imagine. Patricia called daily, pretending to be concerned about my welfare, suggesting I was being manipulated by strangers who wanted to take advantage of me. "Michael, you don't really know this Jonathan Baker person. How can you trust him with your future?" "I trust him more than I trust you," I answered honestly. "He treats me with respect and has offered me independence. You treated me like a problem to be solved." Stephen attempted to guilt me by having Ashley call, though I could hear her parents coaching her in the background. "Grandpa," Ashley said hesitantly, "Mom and Dad are really stressed about having to move. Isn't there some way you could work this out with them?" I softened my voice for her sake. "Ashley, Sweetheart, I'm sorry your parents are stressed, but they created this situation when they decided I was too much trouble to have around. Sometimes adults have to face the results of their choices. The most ridiculous attempt came from Richard, who called to offer me money to reverse the sale. Michael, he said, I'll write you a check for $50,000 if you can find a way to cancel this transaction. We're too old to start over somewhere else. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Richard, I'm 4 years older than you, and I'm starting over just fine. The difference is that I'm doing it by choice, not because someone decided I was inconvenient. Meanwhile, Jonathan kept me updated on every step of our plan. Architects had drawn up plans for the guest house, and contractors were ready to begin construction as soon as Stephen's family vacated. It's going to be beautiful, Michael, Jonathan said over the phone. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, living room with a fireplace, and a screened porch facing the water. You'll have complete independence, with the peace of knowing someone's nearby if you need help. Curious, I asked, what about you? Won't having me on the property cramp your style? Jonathan laughed. Michael, I'm 55, widowed and retired. My style these days involves reading books, cooking elaborate meals for one person, and talking to my cat. I think I can handle having a neighbor who actually holds up his end of a conversation. 3 weeks after the dramatic confrontation at the party, Stephen made one final attempt to change my mind. He arrived at Sunset Manor with Ashley in tow, both of them looking defeated, exhausted, and completely stripped of their previous arrogance. We met in the small visiting room. For the first time since this nightmare began, Stephen's usual smug confidence was gone. His shoulders were slumped. His voice lacked the sharp edge I had grown used to. Dad, he started, pausing. Maybe we overstepped. We didn't understand how serious this would be. I leaned back in my chair, calm and unshakable. It's too late, Stephen. The house is sold. The guest house is being built. And for the first time in months, I'm finally living life on my own terms. Ashley looked at me with a mixture of guilt and relief. I'm glad you're happy, Grandpa, she said quietly. Stephen could only nod, defeated. He had finally realized that no threats, no arguments, no appeals to guilt could undo what I had taken back. My independence, my dignity, and my life. Dad, I want to apologize, Stephen said quietly, almost a whisper. We handled everything wrong. We should have talked to you about moving in. Patricia's parents, we should have asked what you wanted instead of just deciding what was best for you. Yes, you should have, I replied. Is there any way we can fix this? Any way we can make it right? I looked at my son and, for the first time in years, saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Stephen, you can't unring a bell, I said firmly. You showed me exactly how you and Patricia viewed me, as a burden to be managed, not as a person to be respected. That knowledge doesn't just disappear because you're now facing consequences. Ashley reached over and took my hand. Grandpa, I know Mom and Dad made mistakes, she said softly. But they do love you. They're just scared and don't know how to admit they were wrong. Ashley, I said gently, I love your parents, too. But love without respect is just sentiment. Your parents love the idea of me as the grandfather who spoils you and leaves them an inheritance. They don't love the reality of me as a person with opinions, needs, and the right to make my own choices. Stephen was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he asked, what happens now? Do we just never see each other again? That's up to you, I replied. I'll be living in my guest house by Christmas. You're welcome to visit if you can treat me as an equal, instead of a problem to be managed. But I will not tolerate being patronized or manipulated ever again. Ashley hugged me tightly and whispered, I'm proud of you, Grandpa. You stood up for yourself when nobody else would. That night, lying in my narrow bed at Sunset Manor, I reflected on the cost of dignity. It had come at a price. My relationship with my son, at least temporarily, disruption to the lives of people I had once cared about, and the need to become harder and more calculating than I ever thought I could be. But it had also given me back something priceless, my self-respect. For the first time in months, I looked forward to tomorrow instead of simply enduring today. In 6 weeks, I would be living in my own space again, making my own decisions, accountable to no one but myself. The old Michael might have felt guilty about the chaos I had caused. The new Michael understood that sometimes creating chaos is the only way to restore order to your life. Moving day arrived on a crisp November morning, a day that reminded me of when Martha and I first walked through our house 40 years earlier. Jonathan picked me up at Sunset Manor in his pickup truck, and we drove to what would soon become my new home. The guest house exceeded every expectation I dared to have. Nestled in the back corner of the lot with a perfect view of Rehoboth Bay, it looked like a small cottage from a fairy tale. Cedar shingles had weathered to a soft gray, white trim framed the multi-pane windows, and a wraparound porch with rocking chairs faced the water. The contractors finished ahead of schedule, Jonathan explained as we pulled into the driveway. I've been staying here this past week to make sure everything works perfectly. I stepped onto the porch, feeling the cool November breeze and listening to the gentle waves of the bay. For the first time in months, I felt truly at home again, independent, respected, and finally at peace with the life I had reclaimed. Inside the guest house, everything Jonathan had promised, and more, was exactly as I had hoped. The hardwood floors gleamed in the soft morning sunlight streaming through the oversized windows. The kitchen was small, but perfectly designed for 1 or 2 people, with granite countertops, modern appliances, and enough space to cook comfortably. The living room featured a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves that Jonathan had already begun filling with volumes he thought I might enjoy. The master bedroom has its own bathroom, he said, leading me down a short hallway. No bathtub to climb into, grab bars where you need them, but nothing that screams old person's house. The bedroom was ideal, large enough for a comfortable bed and a reading chair, with French doors opening onto the porch. From there, I could see the water stretching across the bay, reflecting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. I could already picture myself sitting there in the early morning, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. Jonathan, this is incredible, I said. How can I ever thank you? By living here and enjoying it, he replied simply. By being the neighbor I hoped you'd be, and by helping me understand what 40 years of loving this place really looks like. Over the next few weeks, a peaceful routine settled into our lives. I would wake early and make coffee on my porch. Often, Jonathan would already be outside, tending the garden Martha had planted decades before. We'd wave to each other across the yard, 2 men enjoying the quiet rhythm of mornings without feeling the need for conversation. Some evenings we shared dinner, taking turns cooking, discovering we both loved experimenting with recipes and discussing books. Other nights, we sat on our porches, him with his cat, me with my memories, quietly content to exist in the same space without obligation or expectation. Ashley visited every other weekend, driving down from the University of Delaware, where she was studying finance. She'd spread her textbooks across my kitchen table while I prepared elaborate Sunday breakfasts reminiscent of the family meals Martha once made. "Grandpa, I love it here," she said one Sunday afternoon as we walked along the water. "It feels like you again. Not the sad, angry person you became when Mom and Dad controlled everything, but the grandfather I remember from when I was little." "I love it too, sweetheart," I replied. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a future worth looking forward to. Stephen and Patricia had moved into a rental house in Lewis, about 20 minutes away. The children had transferred schools, Stephen commuted to work, and Patricia's parents had settled into a senior community near Bethany Beach. I kept up with their lives through Ashley, but we hadn't spoken directly since that final confrontation at Sunset Manor. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to pretend nothing had happened either. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't rebuild overnight. What mattered was that I was home again, not in the house Martha and I had shared for 40 years, but in a new place that honored those memories while giving me the freedom to create new ones. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully at peace. My life was mine again, and I could finally enjoy each day on my own terms. I was 74 years old, living independently, making my own choices, and proving every day that dignity and respect weren't luxuries reserved for the elderly. They were necessities for anyone who wanted to call their existence living rather than merely surviving. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in decades. One evening in March, I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over Rehoboth Bay, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. The air smelled faintly of salt and blooming flowers, carrying with it the quiet reassurance that life still had beauty, even after hardship. Through the garden, I noticed a car pulling slowly into the driveway. Stephen stepped out, pausing for a moment as if he were gathering courage. He walked deliberately across the yard toward my guest house, moving slower than I remembered, shoulders hunched slightly, eyes cast downward. When he reached the porch steps, he stopped, and I saw an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy, like someone who had broken something valuable and needed to confess. "Dad," he said quietly, almost hesitantly, "could we talk?" I gestured to the empty rocking chair beside me. "Of course." He lowered himself into the chair with care, his gaze drifting across the water before finally resting on me. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, measured, a space in which words could gather weight before being released. "I've been thinking about what you said," Stephen began, his voice soft and uncertain. "About respect, about treating you like a person instead of a problem. You were right. We were wrong. I don't know if you can forgive us, but I needed you to know that I understand now what we took from you." We sat together as the last light of day slipped behind the horizon. Some wounds require time to heal. Others require acknowledgement before they can even begin to mend. "I've missed you, Dad," he admitted. "I've missed you too, son," I replied. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. And at 74, I had learned that sometimes a beginning is enough. Never let others define your worth or control your destiny, I reminded myself. Family bonds built on manipulation crumble, but dignity and self-respect, once reclaimed, form the foundation for genuine happiness. It's never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim what is rightfully yours, and to create a life that reflects who you truly are. That evening, as the sky deepened to navy and the first stars began to sparkle over the bay, I realized that the life ahead of me, quiet, independent, full of small joys and chosen connections, was mine to shape. Martha's memory would always live in my heart, but now I had space to make new memories, to enjoy mornings on the porch, evenings by the water, visits with Ashley, and conversations with Jonathan. I had reclaimed my home, my dignity, and my future, and for the first time in years, I felt fully, completely alive.